I'm Paul Patterson, and I'm the recipient of the 2025 GOH Travel Scholarship. Some of you may be wondering, why did I want to do this? Why was I interested in GOH Travel to begin with? The short answer is, I love to travel and I'm creative. I think most creative people love to plan, anticipate, and most of all, they like to imagine. I grew up in a small town, quiet and easygoing, surrounded by nature, but like most places we see every day, it could feel a little repetitive. That regularity fed my imagination though. I didn't travel much as a kid. My parents didn't always have the time or the means, so my curiosity about the world grew. Creativity and imagination are great for dreaming and planning, but it's real experiences that stick to us. Travel creates those kind of memories. It offers visceral, intellectual moments that shift your perspective in ways imagination alone just can't. That's why this GOH Travel opportunity drew me in. It gave me the chance to explore, not just physically but mentally. It let me ask, why do I want to see these places? What can I discover? What can I compare? For me, a big part of travel is comparison, and comparison is central to creativity. I believe if you distill design down to its most basic concept, it is a comparison of likenesses and differences between things. Great design balances extreme differences, familiarity, light versus dark, order versus chaos, complexity versus simplicity. And if you replace design with travel, you find the same truth. Travel invites comparisons between size and scale, culture and customs, ancient and modern, familiar and foreign. It makes us ask, how big are those mountains? How do the people live there? What do we share? What sets us apart? To me, these are the questions that make travel meaningful. They became the heart of my GOH Travel proposal. Using design principles as a guide, I wanted to explore Iceland and Norway, comparing and contrasting their landscapes, cultures, histories, not only with each other, but also with my own life. So why Iceland and Norway? Well, Iceland has always held a special place in my imagination since I was a kid, and my sister had to do a report on Iceland in elementary school. We made a homemade map of Play-Doh, and we used red and yellow food coloring to make the lava for the volcanoes. From then on, Iceland had become the land of fire and ice in my mind. Its landscapes, history, and natural wonders always fascinated me. Why Norway? That inspiration built a little more slowly over time. Norse mythology, Viking sagas, art history books, even Rick Steves' travel shows, it all added up. I became drawn to this land of fjords, mountains, history, and design. Both countries offer what inspires me most: dramatic natural beauty, ancient history and modern culture, unique art and architecture, and people living on what feels like out there on the edge of the world. But why two different times of the year? Their culture and their visual similarities made a strong baseline. By visiting one in the winter and one in the summer, I could explore the extremes of light and dark, warmth and cold, vivid color, stark black, city life, and raw nature. This approach allowed me to compare fire versus ice, light versus dark, urban versus remote, ancient versus modern, and our world versus theirs. These places are shaped by their environment, just like we all are. Their art, design, architecture, and way of life all reflect that. I wanted to witness firsthand, to experience how place shapes people, and to reflect on how those people shape their world in return. Or, as an old Norse proverb says, as one candle can light another, so too can greatness of mind be transferred among men. To remain in solitude is to deprive oneself of this kindling. The time between being announced as a Go Travel recipient and actually leaving was short, but I felt I was ready. One big tip for future Go Travelers: really dig into planning. Details matter, good prep saves you time, confusion, and energy once you're on the ground. We left snowy Memphis, headed to Baltimore, where we met up with my in-laws before flying to Reykjavik the next day. It had actually been colder in Memphis and Baltimore than in Iceland. I suppose it was preparing us for things to come. Even though we had hoped to get a little rest on each of our flights, there just happened to be a medical emergency on the flight to Baltimore, which my wife, Sam, a nurse, dutifully helped out with, and then again on our flight to Reykjavik. Just as we'd fallen asleep, we heard a call again for medical personnel. Sam drowsily got up and helped again. Luckily, it was just someone who had got a little too dehydrated on the flight, which was roasting. About 5 a.m., we finally made it to Iceland's airport, unrested but happy to have arrived. We took a 45-minute bus ride to Reykjavik, dropped our bags at the hotel, had breakfast, and tried to explore, but we were fading fast. Eventually, the hotel staff took pity on us and let us check in early, and after a nap, we hit the streets. It was cold and rainy, but we were excited. Our first meal, lamb soup, at a spot called Icelandic Street Food. It was simple, hearty, and ideal for the weather. Then we visited the Settlement Museum, built around an 1,100-year-old Viking longhouse. The structure and artifacts gave a vivid glimpse into early Icelandic life. After that, it was time for a snack. So we thought, what better time than to try Iceland's famous hot dogs. They're sold by street vendors like any other dirty water dog, but uniquely they're made of lamb. They came highly recommended. I saw them on every blog, vlog, and every other food to try in Iceland list, so we had to give them a try. They were great. They had a variety of sauces, but the crispy onions made the dog. Good for an inexpensive meal on the go. We walked up Skólavörðustígur Street to see Hallgrímskirkja, Iceland's iconic cathedral. Designed by Guðjón Samuelsson in 1937, it looks like it rose straight out of volcanic rock. Futuristic and elemental, striking. We'll come back to the church later, but I'll say that its look, a mix of futuristic cathedral meets crystals rising from the earth, has always intrigued me and made it a must-see if I was ever able to visit Iceland. We had dinner across the street at Cafe Loki. We had more meat soup. Maybe the name translates more elegantly in Icelandic, but they don't seem to have much flourish there, so probably not. It's probably just meat soup. Then for dessert, we had rye bread ice cream. It sounds strange, but it was actually pretty good. It's vanilla ice cream with rye bread crumbles, whipped cream, and caramel. We ended the day wandering to downtown Reykjavik City Hall, taking in its unique architecture before heading back for some much-needed sleep. All right, on day 2, we switched our hotels to the Reykjavik edition and then headed up Laugavegur Street for breakfast with coffee at Reykjavik Roasters and pastries at Browd & Company, including a cinnamon roll that may have been the best I've ever had. It was gooey, crispy, and perfect. With our coffee and pastry perfection in hand, we walked along Faxa Bay, finally getting clear views of the snow-covered mountains. We watched seabirds drift across the turquoise waters and stopped at the Sun Voyager sculpture, a nod to exploration and undiscovered territory. There you couldn't help but visualize the hard journey Icelandic settlers made over 1,000 years ago. Next up was the Harpa Concert Hall. It's a stunning glass and steel building inspired by basalt columns. Inside, it's like being inside a gemstone. Light angles and reflections from wall to ceiling, with dark stone reminiscent of lava stone grounding it. Easily the most impressive architecture of the trip. Truly inspiring. Back at our hotel, we appreciated the Sjálvsögubahn exterior and the use of materials like lava stone and warm wood. The interior was filled with subtle nods to Iceland and its landscape throughout. Icelanders seem deeply proud of their land, and that pride shows through in their designs. We took a stroll along the harbor to the Reykjavik Art Museum. Inside, we discovered a trove of early works by Iceland's own pop art pioneer Arrow. His pieces, bold and bursting with energy, were built from intricate collages, chaotic, clever, and unmistakably his. A visual punch of politics, pop culture, and surreal storytelling. Later, we returned to Hallgrímskirkja, this time to explore inside. The interior is clean and serene, white walls and high ceilings, a giant organ dominating the space. It feels peaceful and humbling. We took the elevator up to the bell tower for sweeping views of the city, colorful rooftops, the harbor, and distant mountains. Windy and freezing, but it was worth every second. We picked up some souvenirs on our walk back, an Icelandic wool blanket like the ones we'd seen in our hotels, and foam Viking swords for our son Luke, which he uses now to stage epic battles in our living room, which I often lose. Dinner that night was at Grill Makathruin, the grill market. The interior was like a tribute to Iceland's landscapes. Moss-covered walls, birch trunks, lava stone, columnar basalt, even codfish skin lit the bar panels. The food, it was probably the best we had of the trip. We tried langoustine on lava rocks, smoked puffin, and reindeer steaks, all local and all unforgettable. If the menu sounds intense, just know that Iceland has millions of puffins and farms of reindeer like sheep. Nothing is wasted and everything is utilized and intentional. That wrapped up our time in Reykjavik. At times it felt wonderfully foreign, and at other times it felt strangely familiar. It was the perfect gateway into Iceland, a city of contrast and creativity. On day 3, we took our tour of Snæfellsnes Peninsula, often called Iceland in miniature because it features so many iconic landscapes in one area. We were picked up early that morning by our guide, Andre. I had hoped to talk to a local Icelander about life in Iceland, but as it turned out, Andre was Portuguese. Still, it worked out. Andre was a professional photographer and videographer. He'd even been published in National Geographic. He gave us a look at some of his photos and video during our trip, so he wasn't exactly a letdown. We drove out of Reykjavik and into some of the most rugged, dramatic terrain I've ever seen. Snow-streaked black mountains loomed in and out of the clouds as Andre played music for our group, a little Elvis for us, and some Icelandic tracks to set the scene. Our first stop was Tunga, a rare golden sand beach in Iceland. It was cold, windy, and snowing lightly, but we were excited. Along the shore, we found scattered whale vertebrae, seaweed-covered rocks rising from the ocean. Many of them were topped with lounging harbor seals. It was the first time I'd ever seen seals in the wild, and they sunned themselves as much as possible in the Icelandic winter. And we wandered the beach, taking photos and watching the waves crash just beyond the calm bay. As we drove on, we passed from farm to farm. Outside Reykjavik, farming and fishing dominate. Looking out at the jagged, boulder-strewn terrain, I was amazed anyone ever managed to farm here, especially 1,000 years ago. Our next stop was lunch at a local farm and guest house. We met our chef, a young Italian man who also worked as a farmhand. He served us fresh cod, local vegetables, and homemade pasta. It felt like a warm home-cooked meal in the middle of nowhere. Afterward, we visited the stables to meet some of the Icelandic horses, or as Sam and I begin to affectionately call them, hjorses. Because, the Nordic language, they love their J's, fjord, fjall, njord. Anyway, we got to pet a few of them before heading off again. Enough horsing around, it was time to move on. Our third stop was Budakirkja, our Black Church. It's a small church that was built in the 1800s that sits on the edge of the ocean in a large moss and grass covered lava field. As legend goes, it had been painted several other colors, but the paint just didn't hold. Finally, someone painted it with used motor oil, and this seemed to work well in preserving the wood. So years on, the church is still painted black, although no longer with used motor oil. Snow fell as we explored the church and its lonely cemetery. It felt quiet, stark, and dramatic, like much of Iceland's landscape. We moved on to Arnarstapi, a fishing village at the foot of the sharp, dramatic Staffafell Mountain. The weather cleared a bit, and we walked along the cliffs, watching the huge waves smash into jagged, geometric stone formations. We stopped to admire Gottklettur, Hole Rock, a natural arch where the ocean's waves blasted through in a frothy rush. Many local features are tied to legends from the sagas of Barður Snæfellsnes, about a half-ogre guardian of the region. Near the path stood a sculpture of Barður himself. With the sun out now, we headed to Londringur, a cliffside with the dramatic sea stacks that to me resembled a Viking ship, or, depending on the legend, frozen trolls. Iceland is full of mystical stories about elves and trolls and ogres and spirits, all shaped by the land. I watched powerful waves dash themselves against the cliffs. Iceland is the most jagged, rough, rugged place I've ever been. It's no wonder that it inspired people to make all these magical tales about all its natural wonders. At Drittvik Cove, we stood on the cliffs and saw a group of humpback whales spouting in the bay below. This was my first time seeing whales in the wild. Then we hiked down to the black pebble beach of Tuplansander. The black cliffs were veined with rusty red, and the whole scene looked otherworldly. The sun hovered low, casting golden light across the rocks. We hiked back up and finally got a clear view of Snæfellsjökull, the glacier-top volcano made famous in Journey to the Center of the Earth. It was magnificent. We walked back to the cliff tops for a view before we left, and we were lucky enough to see a leap or two from the whales while the clouds started to roll in. Our final stop was at Kirkjufell, or Church Mountain, now better known to the Game of Thrones fans as Arrowhead Mountain. The snow had returned, but we braved the cold to see the spire rise out of the sea, with waterfalls tumbling nearby. It was an unforgettable scene to end the day. We boarded the bus, quiet and reflective, listening to Andre as he shared a few last facts while we headed back to Reykjavik. Truly Iceland in miniature, Snæfellsnes was fantastic and one of the highlights of our trip. We started early with breakfast at the hotel and then picked up our rental car. The morning was snowy, with fresh flakes still falling, but our trusty all-wheel drive with spike tires kept us safe on the icy roads as we left the coast and headed inland. Our drive to Thingvellir National Park took about 2 hours. Sam drove while I filmed the landscape rolling by. Vast rural farmland dotted with scrubby trees, occasional hills, and distant mountains peeking in and out of the clouds. It was Iceland in its raw open form. When we arrived, a massive lake stretched out, glassy and smooth. It reflected the snowy sky perfectly, and it was hard to tell where the water ended and the sky began. The whole scene felt ethereal, like stepping into Niflheim, the Norse realm of ice and mist. We parked in what might be the iciest parking lot on earth, had to strap on crampons, and made our way to Thingvellir Visitor Center. Thingvellir is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the historic meeting place of the Icelandic Parliament for nearly 1,000 years. From there, we followed a path into the heart of the park, a dramatic gorge where the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates pull apart. We stopped at Logberg, or Law Rock, where the world's first parliament gathered in 930 AD. This spot has witnessed centuries of rulings, lawmaking, and justice. The skies cleared as we continued, and as soon as we came up to Oxarfoss, a striking waterfall with icy blue, turbulent water. Partly man-made, the Oxara River was redirected here in the 9th century to create the cascade. On our walk back past Law Rock, snow fell softly even as the sun shone, something I'd never quite seen before. We crossed over the Oxara River and visited Thingvallakirkja, a church with views of snow-covered mountains behind. Next, we walked near some wetlands to the Silfra Fissure, a crack in the earth where people snorkel between the two continents, Europe and North America. The water here is glacial melt filtered through volcanic rock and is some of the clearest on Earth. Everywhere we looked, Thingvellir showed its volcanic origins, folded lava rock and rugged stone, telling stories of Iceland's fiery past. It's a place rich with natural beauty and deep history. After soaking it all in, it was time to move on to where steam bursts from the earth, bright blue waters flow, and a little magic dances in the sky. Leaving Thingvellir, we drove about an hour to our hotel in the Haklatur Valley. We had expected to stay in the modest Litli Geyser Hotel, but luck was on our side. We were upgraded to the much nicer Hotel Geyser next door to the smaller hotel because it was closed for the season. A definite bonus. The hotel really captured the essence of Iceland, with clean Scandinavian lines, black glass, gray wood, rusty red metal beams, echoing the volcanic landscape. Inside, stone, concrete, and wood combined with mossy greens, grays, rusty oranges in the furnishings. Biophilic touches brought hints of the lush green Iceland only shows in the summer. The building itself held history. It was once a wrestling and sports school, parts of which remain, including old walls, a turf roof, now serving as a cozy lounge near the restaurant. Of all the places we stayed, this was our favorite. After dropping off our bags, we headed to the hotel's restaurant. I ordered sole and Sam had a reindeer burger. We enjoyed a beer while watching the geyser erupt every few minutes outside. As evening fell, we walked across the street to the geothermal area and watched Strokr, Iceland's most active geyser, blast skyward multiple times. Along the way, we even spotted a little reminder of home. Back at the hotel, after warming up, we ventured out again to chase the northern lights. The geomagnetic storm wasn't strong, but the skies were clear, so we returned to the dark geothermal fields. Surrounded by travelers from all around the world, we stood quietly, occasionally spooked by Strokr's eruptions. Soon, faint wisps appeared in the sky, pale and shifting and swirling. The aurora grew brighter. Our photos showed glowing skies with greens and hints of red, though to the naked eye it still remained mostly soft and gray. We stayed for about an hour, capturing some amazing shots before heading back to bed, hoping for clear skies the next night. The next morning, we set out early for Gullfoss, a massive double-tiered waterfall sending deep blue water crashing into the canyon. It was awe-inspiring. Surrounded by snow, we stayed quiet for a while, walking to different viewpoints and taking it all in. Next was Brúarfoss, about 20 minutes away on a snowy narrow road. After a short hike, we found the stunning waterfall pouring the bluest water I've ever seen over black rocks, sharply contrasting with white snowbanks. Standing on a small bridge, we listened to the river's roar and felt real wonder at this hidden gem. On our way back, we stopped at a horse farm. A quiet man sold small cups of feed, and we enjoyed watching the shaggy Icelandic horses nibble from our hands. These little horses, some sporting what looked like beards, were full of personality, scratching and jockeying for treats as they prepared for warmer days. Back at the cantina beside the hotel, we had more hearty lamb soup for lunch before spending the afternoon exploring the geothermal area. We hiked up for views of Langjökull Glacier, the valley below, and the open expanses beyond. Bubbling mud pots, steaming geysers, and shifting light made it dynamic and unforgettable. By evening, clouds rolled in and snow began falling again. After a cozy meal, we called it a night, dreaming of what the next day might bring. We woke up to a thick blanket of snow and more falling from the sky. With some trepidation, we packed up and hit the road. Our plan: visit several waterfalls and Reynisfjara Beach, but first, getting there. The road started icy but manageable. Then we turned southward toward the ring road where the snow and ice were thick. I filmed as Sam carefully navigated the slippery road. The mountains looked like cookies and cream ice cream, black rocks peeking through the snow. As we passed houses and small towns, the snow was relentless. Just as I wondered if maybe turning back west was smarter, we reached the ring road and a clearer stretch. An hour later, we arrived at our first waterfall, Sjölandsfors. High cliffs framed the powerful falls, swollen with snowmelt. Water tumbled over the edge, some blown sideways by the coastal winds. Seagulls wheeled overhead as we walked along the base. Further along, dark clouds gathered and sleet began to fall. We explored a narrow slot in the cliff before heading to what would become a highlight, Glufrabui. Hidden inside a slot canyon, this waterfall crashes down moss-covered walls surrounded by shimmering mist. We walked along a stream, trying to keep our feet dry but mostly failing. Everyone laughed, turns taking pictures on large rocks beneath the falls. The energy was infectious, like when people sing along at a concert or when your team wins, strangers unified in awe. Different languages buzzed around, but the feeling was universal. Was it a sacred place? Elves at work? Who knows, but it was really cool. Wet but warm inside, waterproof layers. We left as the sun broke through, lighting up the falls and the trail. Next was Skogafoss, which was just on the other side of the mountain. But that's all it takes to change the weather drastically. The weather shifted sharply. Snow, wind, sleet battered us as we approached the massive waterfall. The roar was thunderous. Snow fell, wind blew, sleet stung, but it was worth every icy moment. With time running short, we headed to Reynisfjara Beach. Tourists gathered near basalt columns, watching massive waves crash. We got another good look at how rough the North Atlantic can be. A huge beach of coarse black sand is strange and amazing. I had to reach down and pick some up just to see how it felt in my hands. It was a little coarser than sand I'm used to, but it was much more similar than I would have thought. Offshore, sea stacks rose from the waves. Legends say that they were trolls that were turned to stone by sunlight while hauling their boat ashore. Behind us, snowy mountains and glaciers completed the surreal scene. We sat on the rocks and listening to the relentless ocean before reluctantly heading back. Driving west on the ring road, we paused to explore some nearby old stone caves, Drengeren and Rutseler. Dug into volcanic tuff rock, these shelters date back to the Icelandic settlement period. Simple and practical, they spoke to the rugged history shaped by necessity. Snow clung heavily to one side of the mountain, but melted almost completely on the other side. After passing the peaks, flatlands stretched out before us, hills to the north, open plains to the south. About an hour later, we turned onto a snowy side road to reach our accommodation, the Bubble Hotel. Each room is a clear, inflated dome nestled among thick fir trees. Stephen, a local college student, greeted us and helped us carry our bags along a whimsical trail lit by lanterns. We settled in briefly before driving to a nearby town of Selfoss for dinner, then returned to enjoy our meal inside the bubble, hoping for clear skies and another chance to see the northern lights from our transparent room. But as luck would have it, clouds rolled in and then the rain came, steady and unrelenting. We stayed up hoping for a break, but it rained all night. In the morning, we woke up, most of the snow was gone, melted by the rain. We packed up hiked down to the car, and prepared for our final day in Iceland. Sometimes travel goes perfectly, other times the weather has other plans, but that's part of the adventure. So, what to do on our final day? I'd kept the schedule loose in case the weather interfered, but aside from the night's previous rain, things had mostly worked out. So we decided to explore a few things around Reykjavik that we hadn't gotten to yet. Just leaving the Bubble Hotel, we stopped for what we figured would be our last look at the Icelandic horses. What they lacked inside, they definitely made up for in personality. We grabbed some breakfast in Selfoss before hitting the road. A few days before, I'd seen a tour for lava tubes and thought, why not? We have time. So we drove northwest through the mountains to a high plateau. As luck would have it, we were able to hop on a tour right away. Our guide was a tall Icelandic woman. She led us past heaps of snow that had fallen into the cave through the roof's opening. The bent cones of snow looked like something straight out of a Dr. Seuss book, and it gave a real sense of how heavy Iceland's winters can be. Inside, we were surrounded by brightly covered lava rock. Reds, oranges, purples, some covered in green lichen. Then came the unexpected magic. Stalagmites and stalactites, made of ice, glowing brilliantly under lights. Some were even nearly our height. It was surreal. Further in, the cave warmed and the ice disappeared, and the guide turned off all of the lights so that we could experience the total darkness, a rare and humbling moment. We retraced our steps, soaking in the wonders again, then snapped a quick photo with our guide before moving on. It was an unexpected stop that became one of the many highlights of our trip. Back in Reykjavik, we visited the Árni Magnússon Institute. It houses some of the oldest Icelandic manuscripts, including the Poetic Eddas and Sagas. These texts tell the histories and myths of Iceland and the Norse world, a passion of mine. We headed into the World of Words exhibit, which displays versions of the Sagas, Eddas, and various texts from the Middle Ages. At the beginning of the exhibit was a very cool graphic display which told the story of Norse creation and biblical creation story juxtaposed against each other. Inside, we made our way through, reading the descriptions and insights about the books and sheets of vellum and marveling at the near-ancient books, while scenes of Norse mythology were projected along the wall. At the end, a similar display compared stories of the world's destruction with Norse Ragnarok and the Bible's Book of Revelation. For me, it's hard to make museum exhibits sound exciting, but it really was a great exhibit and really cool to get to see all that history. Next, we stopped at the Museum of Design and Applied Art, a treasure trove of book design, furniture, and clothing through the ages. There was even a workshop where an artist crafted furniture from native Icelandic birch. A quote there struck me. We pay the utmost respect to the past by being true to ourselves, building on the good and old while creating something new that suits us and our times. Beautiful. Hurrying on to Keflavik on the Reykjanes Peninsula, we finally caught the coastline views that we had missed arriving in the dark days earlier. In Njarðvík, we explored the Viking World Museum, filled with artifacts from Iceland's settlement era and Viking expeditions to North America. The centerpiece was a full-size replica of the Gokstad ship sailed by Icelanders to New York in the 90s to commemorate Leif Erikson's voyage of 1,000 years earlier. Afterwards, we enjoyed the sun and walked around a little farm exhibit in the front of the museum. We got a look at small turf-top storehouses and large berms that protect the area from the rough winds that blow through Iceland's mostly treeless landscape. We checked into the airport area hotel and then drove to Keflavik for dinner. Of course, we couldn't resist grabbing Iceland's famous hot dogs for a last taste. Later, fueled by stubborn hope, we headed out to Garther Lighthouse, the most remote spot we could find for a final attempt to view the northern lights. It was dark, cold, and a little eerie. We waited, but clouds rolled in and the weather turned nasty, so no luck. The next day, we arrived at the airport, wandered a bit, took some goofy photos, admired an Aero comic mural before boarding our flight to head home. We flew over Greenland and northern Canada's frozen wastelands before finally touching down in Baltimore. Sam's dad picked us up, reunited with Luke, who was happy to see us despite being thoroughly spoiled by his grandparents. The next day, we caught a quick flight back to Memphis. We were glad to be home, tired but fulfilled. Iceland. Well, Iceland was awesome, but I can't wait to tell you about Norway. Man, time flew between the first trip and the second. It was the end of May and we were back on a plane headed to Norway. Almost. Like our trip to Iceland, we decided to go through Baltimore because of flight length and affordability, etc. We boarded a plane on a Thursday afternoon and headed east. Since tradition dictates that we have a little excitement on these trips, bad storms rolled into Baltimore, and after making it most of the way, we circled for a long time before having to fly over to DC for refueling. We sat there for a while and waited for the storms to blow through. Our 2-hour flight turned into a long one, but we finally took off again and made our way to Baltimore. Sam's mom and dad picked us up much later than they were planning, and we all made it back to their house about 2 a.m. Not the best start, but we had a late flight the next day, so we did all the resting we could. The next day, it was back to Baltimore and time for another overnight flight. Our flight was supposed to take off around 8:30 p.m., but we really took off around 9. The sun had set not long before we boarded the plane, and it was wild to watch it come right back up again just a few hours after going down, while we could still see the moon glowing in the sky. We felt like we were time traveling a little. We had a tight layover, but not to worry, the pilot made up for it, and we were landing in Iceland in a few hours. Iceland? Yep, we flew Iceland Air, and our layover was in Iceland. It was sunny when we landed, and it was cool to see the rocky coastline again. We went through Iceland's customs, grabbed a little food, and back on the plane to Norway. And in just a few hours we were there. It was around 12:30 p.m. when we landed. I think that's about 5:30 here, so we were thoroughly discombobulated. We followed the crowd off the plane and through the airport, and we were out. And wait, did we not go through customs here? Did we miss something? Well, we checked and nope, good to go. Apparently Norway and Iceland, along with most of Europe, are in the Hnedak area. Once you go through customs in one of these countries, there's no longer a need to go through it in any of the other countries. So we did not get a stamp for our passports in Norway. Thumbs down. We had an early flight out the next day, and we definitely needed rest, so it was early dinner and early bedtime for us. We woke up early, ready to head to the Lofoten Islands, an archipelago off Norway's northwest coast above the Arctic Circle. This was really our first taste of Norway, but first we had to get there. We took the shuttle to the airport and quickly ran into a massive line at the gate. I'd expected Norway's airport to be a little more efficient, but it felt like a free-for-all squeezed through just 6 gates. Only 2 people handled all the bag x-rays, and if you hadn't taken your electronics out of your bag, we didn't, they'd send you back through all the way through again. After about 2 hours of this chaos, we finally made it through to our gate and took off. Our destination was Harstad Narvik Airport, about 140 miles above the Arctic Circle. The flight lasted about 2.5 hours, and it was mostly cloudy until we began our descent, where we caught glimpses of stunning mountains stretching east as far as the eye could see. After landing, we grabbed our bags in the rental car and hit the road for Svolvær. Beautiful scenery started immediately. Fjords bordered by snow-covered peaks, white waterfalls rushing down mountainsides, clouds wrapped the highest peaks in mist, adding to the beauty and mystery. We passed through several small communities, catching a glimpse of local life. The drive was only about 2.5 hours, but we took our time, stopping often to admire the pastoral landscapes, snow-capped mountains, the fjords with deep teal and turquoise waters. We were already in awe. Svolvær is the largest town in Lofoten and is sort of considered the unofficial capital. We checked in our hotel, the Thon Lofoten, a curved glass tower right on the harbor. I got a call that our evening cruise had been rescheduled for the next morning, so we took a walk despite it being rainy and cold out. After Iceland, bad weather was easy. We explored the harbor, admiring the boats, colorful buildings, hotels, and the classic red fishermen's cabins. The mix of modern design and rustic structures somehow fit perfectly. Peaks of the mountains appeared between the clouds as we strolled. Dinner was at the Paleo-Arctic restaurant in our hotel. Local seafood paired with views of the harbor, Mount Fløya, and the Goat's Horns, a famous rock formation called Svolværjætta. A French-Canadian couple struck up a conversation with us, and we spoke for a while. They told us a little about their trip so far, and that they were in the middle of a 5-week-long trip driving throughout Norway. Afterwards, it was time to rest up for tomorrow's fjord cruise. After breakfast, we waited outside our hotel to board our boat for a tour of Trollfjord. We headed into the slightly rough waters of the Arctic Ocean before entering calmer waters protected by mountainous islands. Every view was spectacular. Deep teal blue, green waters shifting to turquoise near the shallows. It was almost Caribbean in color. Seabirds flew overhead, snowy mountains rose dramatically from the sea, and despite the rain, cold, and wind, we couldn't stay inside the boat's cabin. The scenery was too breathtaking. We saw houses lining the many island shores, reachable only by boat. I couldn't help but envy the solitude that their owners must enjoy. As we cruised, the mountains disappeared and reappeared in the mist. The scene made me wonder what it was like for Vikings sailing these waters 1,000 years ago. After about an hour, we reached Trollfjord, a narrow fjord northeast of Svolvær. The name comes from a legend that 2 trolls fought over grazing rights, and one chopped a giant cleft with his axe, creating the fjord. The fjord was stunning. Monolithic stone walls rose almost vertically out of still dark water, and snow-covered peaks loomed out in the misty distance. Our boat switched to electric mode and glided silently inside. The only sounds were birds, wind, rain dripping, and waterfalls cascading down the cliffs. We cruised to the fjord's end, turned and headed back. The skies cleared as we exited, and the sun made the mountains green and the waters blue even more vibrant. Several tour boats passed by. One stopped to feed fish to the sea eagles. We watched a noisy battle among gulls and eagles squawking and diving for their catch. We took plenty of goofy pictures because that's what you do when you're happy and amazed by your surroundings. We stayed on the deck as long as we could, soaking up the sun and the views before retreating inside for the rough open sea stretch back to Svolvær. The large waves made people laugh nervously as we went up and down, but the clearing clouds gave full view of the mountains as we approached the harbor, with the town stretched out below. Back on land, we grabbed a quick bite, then we set off to be blown away by more breathtaking scenery on our way to Hnedak. Leaving Svolvær, we headed to Hnedak for what turned out to be the busiest and probably most incredible day of our trip. As we drove, the scenery only got better. The sun peeked through the clouds, lighting up the snowy mountains alongside deep fjords. Small rural communities dotted the landscape, giving a real sense of life here. About an hour and a half in, we stopped at a bright yellow house with a turf-top roof perched above a vivid green pasture right on the fjord's edge. Behind it, smaller domed mountains gave way to towering snow-capped peaks in the distance. It was beautiful. It was idyllic. I imagined what it must be like to wake up here every day, and I was a little bit envious. Not far from there, we stopped at Morpheus Beach, a rocky cove half-ringed by jagged, snowy mountains. The sun made the colors pop, and it felt almost tropical with turquoise waters and white sand, except for the snow-covered mountains and the bright red houses and fish drying on racks nearby. The next stop, Ramberg Beach. We'd seen photos, and it didn't disappoint. Surrounded by mountains with white sand and brilliant blue water, my goal was to take a dip in the Arctic Ocean. As you've probably seen earlier, we've been wearing warm clothes up to this point, and it was not particularly warm out, but the sun was out, and by this point it was as warm as it's going to get, probably somewhere in the low 50s. We parked our car and made our way down to the beach. There was almost nobody there. We were the only lunatics on the beach willing to take the plunge. After a quick test with the toes, I dove in. The water was painfully cold, just how I expected. While drying off and soaking up the sun, we debated cracking open some of the beers that we saved from Svolvær, but we decided to wait until after our hike. We drove on, crossing bridges and tunnels connecting the islands until we had reached Hnedak, a small town perched on a peninsula surrounded by dramatic mountains and the ocean. We checked into Kattegarden, a cozy hotel overlooking the harbor. Our host pointed us to a local grocery store, since most of the restaurants only serve lunch, so we grabbed food to cook for later. By 7:30 p.m., with endless daylight, we decided to tackle Hnedak. The hike starts with a mile-long walk along the highway and then hundreds of stone stairs installed by Nepalese Sherpa to make the climb safer, but not a lot easier. I strategically told Sam very little about the hike and thus received very little pushback. I knew it'd be pretty tough, but better not let her know until we were in the midst of it. And once we got there, I'd let her I won't be defeated attitude do the rest of the work. The climb was tough, and slow and steady was the only way. We passed waterfalls, scrubby trees, wildflowers, and views that made the highway look like a tiny ribbon. We eventually climbed above the clouds, feeling like hobbits in some Tolkien tale. Except, instead of finding trolls, we only found marmots and giant slugs that were a lot less magical. At 9 p.m., we had reached the top, but the mountain peak was wrapped in clouds. Still, brief moments when they parted gave us stunning views of Hnedak, like a town floating in a sea of clouds. I went on up the path as high as I dared. The stone stairs had run out, and there was only mud and gritty bare rock for footing. And at that moment I thought, it's a good thing I bought the extra travel insurance. The height was dizzying, and it made you tread very carefully and want to find a place to sit and enjoy the view. I took as many videos and looks as I could before the clouds completely surrounded us. That was our cue to head back down with what little visibility we had left. I had played a little music quietly on the way up. Music from Lord of the Rings soundtrack, of course, because I'm a nerd and it seemed very appropriate given our surroundings. I had made my usual jokes to lighten the mood, but they were becoming less well received as we descended, and there were grumblings of, "Why do you take me on these death marches in the mountains?" We needed something a little peppier to ease the trip, so I popped on a little Bruce Springsteen, and Sam, having been born in New Jersey, was imbued with all the extra strength that the Boss's 1984 album Born in the USA could provide. The non-Americans that we passed on our way down seemed less impressed, but admittedly I'm also not a Bruce Springsteen fan per se, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Glory days powered us on down the last leg, and with some flexing, a hop, a skip, a jump, and a little leg kick at the end, for good measure, we were down the mountain and ready to walk back into town. The walk back was nice and leisurely along the coastline. Back in town around 11 p.m., the setting sun lit the red houses and mountains with warm orange light, one of the most beautiful views we had had on the trip. We cracked open our celebratory beers on the hotel balcony, joined by a seagull who seemed to watch the clouds roll in with us. It was time for bed. The next morning, after coffee and cinnamon rolls, almost as good as Iceland's, I walked underneath the racks of thousands of drying cod with this mildly sweet, fishy smell. As we walked, we got to see workers taking down and packing up the stockfish for shipment. Every angle here was picture perfect. We crossed a bridge to a famous photo spot of red cabins hugging the fjord. Then we walked back along the coast. At one point, a seagull staged a surprise attack.
Whoa! Holy shit! You got buzzed me.
Well, I was a little shaken, but I still got the shot. One of my big goals for Norway was to have a chance to kayak among the fjords. That time had come at about 8 p.m. I know that seems late for kayaking, but maybe because of the time difference or the endless sunshine, our energy never waned. Wearing rain gear against the cool weather, we met our guide, Teresa, a German-Spanish adventurer who split our time between Spain and Norway. We paddled across the inlet into Bunesfjorden, surrounded by crystal clear waters and rugged mountains that rose up to towering heights just beside us. We glided past starfish while yellow houses dotted the shore. Teresa pointed out the home of the fjord's only permanent resident, reachable only by boat, and a hiking trail over the mountains to a hidden beach, a destination for another trip should we ever have the chance to return. Despite some rain, the kayak trip was magical. We stopped in a grotto to listen to the mountain streams and paused beneath a mountain with a formation that Teresa said was a troll, the fjord's guardian, according to a local legend. On the way back, a sudden avalanche sent snow crashing down the mountainside. No one was hurt, but I'm sure the hikers on Rhinabriggen took notice. Back at the dock, we packed up, snapped some final photos, and thanked Teresa as the sun set behind the mountains. A perfect ending to our last evening in Rena. The next morning, we packed up and prepared for the long drive back to Evenes. Taking it slow, we had breakfast again at Bring In Cafe Bar, where we ran into our Canadian friends from Svolvær, now on their leisurely route down to Rena. After coffee, we wandered through the town a bit more, wishing we had arranged for a few extra days here. You never really have enough time in places like this. You almost have to live here to soak it all in. Crossing the bridge out of Rena, we took one last look at what was probably the most picturesque town we'd ever seen. No complaints though, because we had a 4.5-hour drive of stunning scenery that awaited us. The weather had turned colder and rainy for the return trip. We paused at Skagsundan Beach to watch surfers brave the cold and blue waves, surrounded by misty mountains. An almost surreal sight. We stopped again at Morpheus Beach, where the clouds and rain blanketed the mountaintops, but it was still breathtaking. Further along the E10, we reached the small town of Bostad and visited the Lofter Viking Museum. It's built on the site of a king's longhouse, with a replica house that gives you a real sense of Viking life. We wandered the museum admiring Viking artifacts from around 800 AD. Swords, axe heads, jewelry, tools, detailed recreations of period clothing. Then outside to the hilltop, where the longhouse once stood, there was a large replica. The house was ornate and sturdy, with wooden walls banked halfway up with turf. Inside, displays captured everyday life, from cooking and clothing to carving, tapestries, and areas for religious practice. It was a fascinating glimpse into Viking life about 1,200 years ago. Afterwards, we hiked through a pasture surrounded by mountains. You could see why a king would claim the spot: fertile lands, beautiful views, and natural defenses. We walked down the road through dense fir forest, where some trees were carved with faces of Norse gods, probably to add atmosphere for the museum's events. The trail opened near a lake, home to a replica Viking ship. Usually it sails the lake, but today it stayed docked because of the rain. I thought about how cool it would be growing up here as a kid and visiting here on school trips. I felt like a big kid on a field trip myself. We strolled back, passing speckled cows unlike any I'd seen before. We bought a couple of souvenirs for Luke and said goodbye to some of the friendly horses, greeting the visitors near the parking lot before hopping back onto the highway. From there, we just enjoyed the drive, stopping once by a small pond and then again near a fjord. The mist hung low on the mountains, rain feeding the countless waterfalls. Gray skies gave everything a fresh green glow, different from the sunshine on earlier days, but beautiful in its own right. As we passed through a small town, traffic slowed to a stop, and we wondered what was going on. It was a herd of domestic reindeer that had casually crossed the road, velvet antlers regrowing and their bells clanging, a true glimpse of Lofoten's wild side. Nearby, sheep grazed with stunning views of fjords and mountains, because here everyone has a great view. We saw plenty of elk fair, moose crossing signs, but no moose on that day. Maybe it was the wrong season. Eventually, we arrived back at Evenes and checked in our small, no-frills hotel. There was no staff, and check-in was all via kiosk. It was a bit odd, but I guess that's how it goes in a town that size. That night, as always when leaving an incredible place, we went to bed thinking about coming back someday. We hopped a quick flight back into Oslo, grabbed our rental car, and started the 45-minute drive into the city. The route took us through small communities and farmland before transitioning into suburbs. GPS maps were spotty at best in Oslo. There are several tunnels that run under the city, and it doesn't work at all in those. There are also exit ramps that merge in and out of the tunnels. Need to exit while you're in a tunnel? Hope you planned ahead. Otherwise, you'll find out on the other side that you didn't make it. After a few loops around the hotel, thanks to Oslo's maze of one-way streets, we finally checked in. Our room had a great view overlooking the city and the surrounding hills. From above, you could see the contrast of historic and modern architecture side by side. That night, we ate at Den Glad Gris, or the Happy Pig, a fitting name for a place that served giant Norwegian pork dishes. I went for the pork knuckle and vegetables. It was massive, delicious, and heavy. We took an evening walk through Slottsparken, a green park near the Royal Palace, and we continued down to Akershus Fortress, a medieval stronghold from the late 1200s. Its massive gates, cobblestone paths, and stone buildings from multiple centuries made it a powerful walk through history. From the ramparts, we looked out over Oslo Fjord. Cannons still stood ground, some bearing damage from Nazi attacks years ago. Akershus provided a look at the history and architecture to be juxtaposed against the more modern landmarks we'd soon see. Nearby was the modern Oslo Opera House, rising from the harbor like an angular iceberg. But we'd save that for later. Instead, we headed over to the Munch Museum, dedicated to Norway's most famous artist, Edvard Munch. The building itself was a work in modern art, clad in silver screen-like metal, with a podium and a tower which bent at the top, almost italicized in opposition to the back-slanted typography, echoing the dramatic style of Edvard Munch. Inside, we saw his evolution as an artist, from intimate everyday scenes to his darker themes, anxiety, loneliness, and death. Seeing multiple versions of the Scream in person was surreal. The museum also traced his shift towards lighter tones later in life, especially during his time in Oslo's Sjøen neighborhood. From the upper levels, we had a panoramic view of the Barcode Project, Oslo's ultra-modern skyline with sliced-up, staggered buildings designed to let in more light and air. We passed by the costume workshops of the Opera House, colorful buildings lining the streets, and returned to our hotel, the city lights still glowing. We started with the Museum of Cultural History, just a short walk from our hotel. The museum gave deep context to Norway's history, from the Stone Age, Bronze Age, Viking Age, even through medieval Christianity. The Viking exhibit was especially fascinating. Seeing real swords, ship decorations, and even a female warrior's remains in person made it all much more tangible than photos ever could. There were religious icons that once hung inside churches, along with beautifully carved doorways of stave churches that have since been torn down. In the center of the exhibit was a large runestone. It told the story of a bridge being built by a local leader, which may not seem exactly exciting, but to me, the runestone, as well as the paintings from the church ceilings, the scenes carved in the stave church doorways, the religious icons, and all the things we'd seen earlier and would see later, were all a testament to graphic designers before me who were there trying to illustrate, through early forms of visual storytelling, something important about the time they lived in. Next stop, we visited the Norwegian Folk Museum, the world's first open-air museum, and its highlight, the Gull Stave Church, built around the 1200s. It's hard to describe. Part Viking ship, part Gothic castle, part gingerbread house. Its dark wood exterior contrasted sharply with the blue sky and green trees. Inside, it was dimly lit and atmospheric, murals on the wall and massive staves holding up the ceiling. It was whimsical and interesting, and probably my favorite building that we toured in Norway. There were a couple other buildings on the hill near the Gull Church, so we decided to have a look at those while we were there. They were cabins and farm buildings from the 1800s with ornately carved exteriors despite their utilitarian purpose. Many of the buildings had turf and moss roofs with birch bark for moisture barriers. Further down, there was a whole community of similar turf-roofed cabins. We went into a small, brightly painted guest house that was covered in what I guess you would call murals inside. Almost every inch of the walls and ceiling were covered in decorative motifs. I wonder how long it had taken to do all that work, and I had the idea that maybe during the days before internet and TV, during the long dark winters, carving and painting were probably great pastimes. Next, we drove over to Ekeberg Park on a hill in the southeast of Oslo. It's a peaceful green space surrounded by quiet neighborhoods and colorful houses. But we weren't there for the view, not yet. We came to see 6,500-year-old rock carvings etched into the stone by ancient hunters, moose, or elk in Norwegian, humans, simple symbols saying, "This is where we hunt. the original visual communication. I traced my fingers along the grooves, imagining the person who carved them. No design brief, no deadline, probably just the best artist in the tribe, doing what they could to preserve something important. It made me wonder if anything I've made would ever last a fraction as long. Afterward, we climbed back up the hill and took in the sweeping views of the city. Then wandered around the park, discovering sculptures by Dali, Rodin, Renoir, and then this one, a little bit less family-friendly, which reminded me, in Norway and Iceland, the cultural attitude towards inappropriate subjects is far more relaxed than in the US. Just an observation. After driving back to the hotel, we walked down to the opera house, hoping to explore inside, but it was closed. So, needing food and drink, we found a brewery called Roar. Similar to any microbrewery back home, it was good for a laid-back evening. We sat and talked for a while, watching people go by. A rowdy crew of Norwegians wearing cowboy hats started singing Friends in Low Places, and we finished the chorus for them. Afterwards, they insisted that we come over and share a table with them. We spent the evening swapping stories, and one guy asked where I hailed from. I started explaining Mississippi, but then he clarified. He meant my ancestry. So I told him mostly the British Isles, but they insisted that I had some Scandinavian ancestry somewhere, and I told them it must be the beard. After a few more stops, we said our goodbyes and walked back to the hotel through a surprisingly still busy Oslo. It seemed like the tendency while visiting Norway was to stay up late and get started a little late too. We didn't really plan to do this, but it just seemed to work out that way. The sun never setting in Lofoten and being up till 11 p.m. or so in Oslo every night, and us being on a totally different time zone had our internal clocks out of sorts, and it made it tough to keep up with the time. That and Oslo never seemed to get much quieter despite the time of day. That morning we made our way back to the opera house. Its marble and metal exterior rose directly from the water, and the entire building was designed as a public space. You could walk its angled surface straight up to the rooftop, where you could get a great view of the city. Inside, the architecture was just as striking. A sweeping curved staircase dominated the lobby. A sculpture by Yuri Kailan literally danced in and out of the glass facade. Larger-than-life figures of dancers were suspended and bisected by the glass. The artist's statement, "I've always been fascinated not only by the movement and the stillness, but also by the question of whether we are inside or outside a space. That's why my sculptures are partly inside and partly outside." Just another artist seeking contrast with design. Next, we walked over to the National Museum, our last deep dive into Norwegian culture. Inside, we found an incredible range of religious icons, royal garments, design objects, propaganda posters, and yes, more Munch, including the most famous version of the Scream. There were masterpieces by Van Gogh, Monet, Cézanne, Picasso, and many lesser-known Norwegian artists. There were scenes from mythology, daily life, and beautiful Norwegian landscapes. There was even a painting of a fisherman admiring a model boat. I think he may lend some credit to the opinion held by our Norwegian friends that I might have some Scandinavian ancestry. That evening, many of the restaurants were closed for the Pentecost holiday, but we found a cozy place that served a mix of Norwegian and Middle Eastern dishes. We shared a small table while larger groups of locals and families laughed and celebrated. And just like that, it was time to go home. The next morning, we drove back through the countryside to the airport, got breakfast, flew to Iceland for a brief layover. From the window, I got one last look at Iceland's surreal landscape. We breezed through customs, bought our food for the rest of the trip, and flew the long 6 or so hours back to Baltimore. Back to Sam's mom and dad's, telling him as much as we could about our trip along the way. Then straight to bed, straight back to the airport, and home again. With big hugs from Luke when we came through the door, so happy to see him, and him so happy to see us. They were wonderful trips that were over in a flash. We're forever grateful and never the same. As I stated in the beginning, I believe that at its most basic, design is the comparison of likenesses and differences between things, unity and contrasts. Extremes in unity and contrast make for some of the most impactful designs. So, Put simply, my goal was to apply extreme contrast and unity to travel. Was I able to stick to my theme, and did I achieve what I set out to do? Well, let's start with the big ones, light and dark. The seasonal contrast between Iceland's dim winter and Norway's glowing summer revealed how people shape their lives around the light. Icelanders moving through the snow and rain with ease embraced their climate with calm resilience. In Norway, we saw the celebration of never-ending daylight. With hikes and a city that kept going into the wee hours, nature set the tempo and the people adjusted accordingly. Cities and culture. Well, Reykjavik felt intimate, proud, and deeply tied to its national identity. Oslo, larger and more international, layered history with modern European influence. One was more isolated, one more connected, but both reflected a deep connection to place, whether it was through traditional woolcraft or contemporary art, seafood, or nature-inspired design. Food, art, and architecture all served as cultural mirrors. Iceland embraced the rugged and raw, steeped in mythology and nature. Norway felt more classical, curated, with longer historical threads, but both were beautiful in their own ways. The rural spirit. In the countryside, the unifying thread was self-reliance, a rugged individualism that reminded me of my own rural upbringing. From Iceland's rocky farms to Norway's tilled fields, people worked with what the land allowed and lived close to nature. It was functional, utilitarian, simple, and quietly powerful. Nature and impact. Iceland was like some frozen otherworldly planet, and Norway was more like something out of a fairy tale. Both offered natural beauty on an epic scale, and I think part of what made it so stunning was that these places weren't every day. These places contrast with home, with what's familiar, and gave the experience true weight. In a way, I'm kind of glad that I don't see these places every day. After all, it's the contrast that make the design. It wouldn't be as spectacular of an experience if I saw those places every day. The mundane makes the spectacular even more spectacular. Impact is made by the counterbalance. Finally, how did everything we saw affect me and my own work? Travel can be a lifelong learning experience, and I'm sure I have yet to realize everything that influenced me on these trips. But I'll tell you some of the things that did. Planning. From start to finish, planning, design is another word for planning, is key. While you have to let some things be free or open-ended, thinking everything through is key to success. I watched videos, read blogs, researched websites, talked to friends and coworkers about the places when I was writing my application and planning my trip. I relied on all of these to ultimately make my trip smooth and successful. That brings me to another lesson learned. Using others' perspectives and experiences and advice to help you formulate your own unique experience. This works for travel, and it also applies to work. Combined efforts where each person gets to use their own unique talents usually make for our best projects. I realize we try to do this at HBG often. Design with what's around you. Use the pieces you've been given for inspiration. Particularly in Iceland, everything about the country made its way into the design. Nature, history, and mythology were all sources of inspiration. It really had so many parallels with what we do, particularly for our tribal clients here at HBG. I see so many of my coworkers work hard to make our projects that are inspired by or fit in with the natural world surrounding them. History, mythology, and nature are all cleverly wrought into our designs, forms, and functions. What is important to our clients becomes important to us and are brought to life by design. History and meaning, purpose are important. The National Gallery in Norway was full of things that had a lot of meanings to the people who created them and to the people they were created for, and they stood the test of time. Even if things have a more functional or utilitarian meaning or purpose, it's still important. Multi-use is interesting. While creating a singular masterpiece is great, things that can be used in a lot of different ways are maybe greater. This thought came from the Oslo Opera House. It's a beautiful venue for music and performance, but it's also a space to display art, a viewpoint, and a public gathering space. This inspires me in my own work to think about how things could be made to move from video to ads to social media to blogs and emails fluidly, and how they can be built with all these platforms in mind from the start. And this sort of goes back to planning, but I had to think a lot about how I would film something, what I was filming and why. What would best illustrate my story? Is this more impactful up close or in slow motion? Or should it be a wider shot? I learned as each trip went on and from one trip to the next. And sometimes, well, a lot of times I just filmed it all in the hope that one of them would work out. But that helps inform my decisions in the future. I really had to be on the lookout for creative opportunities too. Things I wasn't expecting were often really cool elements for me to use. Where we went and what we did even needed thought and about their balance and juxtaposition. A marketing lesson from Iceland would be, know what you have and push its best features. I was hit at every turn in Iceland by Iceland promoting Iceland. On the plane, the video screens, they showed the beautiful nature, history and Vikings, northern lights, volcanoes, Icelandic wool, and the products were everywhere. We saw it all again on the plane ride home. They took the best features of what they had and made it shine. Everything can't be a knockout punch. The jabs and feints set up the KO. The principles of design can be applied to everything you see and do and will often improve the result. To that point, I will leave you with this quote. If you know the way broadly, you will see it in all things. Miyamoto Musashi, a 17th century Japanese samurai and philosopher.